Welcome to Gunkel Tarot. My name is Brian Griffin. This video is going to be my response to the hashtag 10 pieces of my soul. The 10 decks included here have some similarities and overlaps with, but are not identical to the decks I chose for my only 10 decks video, which, as I understood it, is 10 decks that one has to use going forward, not just the first 10 you grab, but if you could not replace or add any decks beyond 10, what would you use going forward? And so I have that video. This also includes an overlap with some decks that I put in my blog response to my Tarot Rainbow, although my Tarot Rainbow had an Oracle deck or two. So this is the 10 pieces of my soul. These are in an order that makes sense to me, but it's not a priority order. It's not a ranking. So the first piece of my soul is the Morgan Greer Tarot. This is the first deck I bought. It's also the fourth deck I bought because I have a second copy that I use for client readings. This is my personal copy. This is, again, my first deck. It's also a deck that ties me then to 1980 Toronto, to Isaac, my first big love affair, and to those innocent days of 1980 and 81 before HIV/AIDS exploded in my community. So this touches on all of that. It is still my default deck for client readings. So that is number one. Although this next deck is much newer, it came out a few years ago and I acquired it not that long ago, it takes me back to that early days because this is the ETA Tarot, the Emerging Toronto Artists. And it's a collaborative deck, and I used to think I couldn't work well with collaborative decks because of the variations in art style. And there is a certain amount of variation, but I don't find it a problem. And I find it interesting. It can be sometimes startling, although you'll see they do tend to look good on the edges. So this is the ETA, and again, it's a new deck, but it brings me to Toronto, and specifically art community in Toronto. I spent much of my early days selling art supplies and otherwise working with artists, which of course in therapy we've learned is a way of avoiding having to actually commit to doing your own art. I'm sure some people will relate. So that's the ETA. The third deck, which takes us into my early days, this represents my childhood, or what I think process of my childhood. This is Patrick Valenza's Abandoned Oracle deck. And I didn't, at the time, think I had a terrible childhood. I was a loner. We moved a lot, as in moved different cities, with Dad getting transfers at work. And there were family secrets that we didn't talk about. And there was abuse. And I'm vague on details because although I will talk pretty openly about my own life, there are others involved in overlaps, and their stories are not mine to tell until they are ready to tell them. It's modern day, and this is the Somnia Tarot, Nicholas Bruno's photography look at his, not nightmares, night terrors. It's a couple of years old, and there are a number of people who have reviewed it, walked through, talked about it, picked it in various deck categories. As a photographer, I appreciate the work that goes into it, all the props in the building. I have minor differences of opinion on selected things, but it's definitely talks to a part of my soul. And another collaborative deck is the US Games Pride Tarot. And this speaks to my coming out as a gay person in 1978. I now identify as queer. And again, collaborative decks that I didn't think I would be able to bond with because of variations in style, and obviously there is. But it works, and it has a lot of use and representation. The next deck is I'm cheating because it's not one deck technically. It's a collection of 3 decks of 42 cards each and 1 deck of 10 cards each. I'm not going to be able to show much because it is an explicit deck. So it is by the same artist as does the St. Jinx Tarot, which I also have, which is also has male nudity. So these are the 3 regular decks and then the additional 10 pieces. So it's sex and sexuality and paganism of the Fae, etc. Representation there. The next deck is another Patrick Valenza, and this is one that some people find creepy, and I don't really consider it creepy. I do consider it humorous in its own way, and as I said in my only 10 decks, I consider it a very life-affirming deck. I mean, there are quote-unquote scary or creepy pictures. There are certainly aspects of it that are quote-unquote dark, but it's not, to me, anything other than life-affirming and in its own way humorous. And being life-affirming and humorous in the face of tragedy is very definitely a major part of my soul and how I have managed to survive as reasonably healthy, and I wouldn't go so far as to say well-adjusted as I am. And so that's number 7. The Light Seers I chose as a representation of modern life, a deck that can connect clients who don't appreciate the traditional RWS imagery or the Marseille style medieval period. I could just as easily have chosen the This Might Hurt Tarot or the Everyday Enchantment Tarot. They are both excellent. I have both of them, and they do represent modern life. And the reason I chose this one here, as well as in my only 10 decks, is because I like to pair it with Chris-Anne's Sacred Creators Oracle. And this is the only deck I have that you might think of as perky messages and quote-unquote softness. And I look at it as affirming what I'd said before about working with artists, hopefully helping them, even though it's at its core, it's also not doing my own artwork, so there is that. So so this again touches both the creative inside of me and the working with other creatives. Number 10, we go back to my old days. This one is the Sacred Path Oracle. Jamie Sands co-created this, and she also did the medicine cards, which are the animal-based cards. Same size cards, similar artwork, not exactly the same, but similar artwork. So this one in particular, I chose to represent my spirituality, and it's not that I am of indigenous blood. I don't claim that. And it's not that my religion is based entirely on that. My spiritual practice, well, can best be summed up between this deck and on my altar I have Baphomet as a plushie. I have a small statue of Ganeshi, and I have Arcee, my divinity of comedy, and by Arcee I mean my rubber chicken. So there you have it. Those are my 10 pieces of my soul.